About 4 years ago, the popularity of this X100v, or the X100v from Fuji, was so popular that you could barely get your hands on one. And if you did, you were paying double or even triple the price of retail. I got this one for $1,900, and the retail price when it dropped was $1,300. So I did pay significantly more for this camera because there was so much hype around it, I thought it was worth it. I was greatly disappointed when I bought this camera and started shooting with it because it did not give me the results that I was hoping for, at least what everybody else said it was going to give. But today, we're going to talk about Fuji's newest addition to the X series, the Fuji X100VI. We're going to talk about the pros, the cons, what it's like shooting with this camera, and how all of the updates that Fuji has made have finally made this camera worth purchasing. Let's get into it. The price of Fuji's newest addition to their X series does come in at a whopping $15.99. It is slightly more expensive than the X100v, but with all of the updates that they have made to improve this newest generation, I believe it is worth every penny. A few of the most significant updates that Fuji has made to this generation is that the resolution is higher, the autofocus has been improved with a new processor, and there is now in-body image stabilization. With the higher resolution going from 26 megapixels with the X100v to 40.2 with the new X100VI, gives you the ability to print larger images, and it gives you the ability to crop in further and lose less resolution. So you're not going to have as much pixelation in the cropped image that you have as your final product. The addition of the in-body image stabilization, or IBIS, allows you to shoot at a lower shutter speed and in low light and maintain the sharpness in your images. You were not able to do that before with the X100v. So this new in-body image stabilization is a huge improvement, and I believe it's one of the reasons why this camera is worth the $15.99 that they are asking for this camera. The X100VI has the same processor that the X5 has, in addition to some of the other cameras in Fuji's lineup, but this new processor allows you to have better autofocus. It is a new AI-powered system that allows you to detect different subjects like cats or birds or people, even vehicles, and make it a lot easier for you to focus on the subject that you're trying to focus on. This processor is a huge improvement when it comes to autofocus and being able to capture the image sharply and not have your subject's eyes be out of focus or their face out of focus. This is one of the biggest issues I had with the previous generation. The ability to focus on your subject was very difficult. The first time I shot with the X100VI, I could tell almost immediately that the autofocus was better. And this was with the settings just straight out of the box. I didn't really mess with anything. I wanted to see what the camera was capable of without me having to tweak anything. I did eventually change some of the settings, but with the factory settings, it was something that I noticed a drastic difference in. A very noticeable and notable difference when shooting with this camera. I will say that for me, when I was shooting with the previous generation, the X100v, part of the reason I did not pick this camera up was because I didn't like the way that it would focus. I felt like I was missing shots and there wasn't really a reason for me to be using this camera because I wasn't getting the images that I wanted from it, which meant that I wasn't picking the camera up and using it. My response to the newer generation, the X100VI, was the complete opposite. Because it was doing such a good job focusing and finding the subject that it needed to dial in on, I didn't have to worry about whether or not I was going to capture the image, and it made me pick this camera up a lot more than I did with the previous generation. So that in and of itself makes this camera worth it for me. I believe that cameras should inspire you. They should make you want to pick them up. You should be excited to go take pictures with it. If it doesn't do that, then you probably should find something else that does do that for you, because that's the point. You're supposed to be inspired and go and take pictures. This newest generation does that for me. The next point we need to cover is size and weight. They're negligible. Honestly, it's 521 grams with the newest generation versus the previous generation being 478 grams, and it's 2 millimeters wider here. It doesn't look it with this hood that I have on here, but I mean, you don't notice when you're shooting with this camera at all, which is why I say that it's negligible. The next point we need to cover is battery life. Fuji states that you will get roughly 450 shots from a single battery, and the previous generation was around 420. I will say that was another noticeable difference for me when I was out shooting with this camera. Even when I was treating it the same way I did with the previous generation, where I was turning it off when I wasn't using it, being very cognizant about when I would turn the camera on and leave it on if there were lots of images I was trying to capture, all of those factors being the same. When I came home with the X100VI, the battery life was significantly more than what it would have been if I was shooting with the X100V, to the point where I didn't even have to charge the battery after a day of shooting. That is something you have to do with the X100V. So do keep that in mind when you're looking at these cameras. The battery life on the newer generation is significantly better. And it does say you only get 30 shots more with this newest generation, but it was something that stood out to me when I was shooting. And the Fuji X100VI is going to come with 20 film simulations, where the X100V only came with 7. Now, I had a lot of fun playing around with this. I have Portra 400, which is my favorite film stock to shoot on, as well as Ilford HP5 loaded into the X100VI, as well as some Cinestill and other fun things, and I never felt like I was out of options when I was shooting and going through those film simulations or those recipes. That is definitely a nice to have addition. One of the last points I do want to cover is the fact that the newest generation, the X100VI, does have the ability to go to 6.2K in video resolution, where the previous generation shot up to 4K. There was an issue with the battery on the previous generation overheating when you were shooting in 4K, but do keep in mind that it was an issue with the previous generation, and it should be something that you're keeping an eye out for, just in case it's something that has carried over with this new generation. A few things that have stayed the same: the lens on the front of the camera is going to still be 23 millimeters on both the new version as well as the older version. You're going to have a 23 millimeter lens that is the equivalent of a 35 millimeter lens on a full frame camera. These are both still crop censored cameras. They do have Bluetooth, and with the update of the app, it is now super easy for you to transfer those directly from the camera to your phone, so that it makes it more accessible when you're trying to quickly upload things to social media. They both do have this tilting screen. Both are weather sealed, which means they are water resistant and dust resistant. Both shoot at 11 frames per second, as well as having an internal ND filter. Those are a few of the things that have stayed the same that I want to mention. There are a number of other things, but those are a few that I felt were important. If you are interested in seeing a full list of those specs, I will make sure I have a link down in the description so you have access to it. And quickly, I'm going to go through the pros and cons of the newest generation. For me, at the top of the list is going to be your ability to change your aperture manually on the outside of the lens. That carried over from the previous generation. It was one of the things that I loved most about that camera because I love shooting film. So it felt very much so like I was shooting a film camera. You do also have your shutter speed on the top, as well as your ISO, so you can change those. And you also have the ability to change your exposure value here, which is super, super nice if you're trying to bracket quickly. The next pro for me, and probably in contention with first place, is going to be the fact that they updated the processor, giving you the ability to have better autofocus. My biggest issue with the previous generation was the autofocus. So for me, the fact that the autofocus was updated, giving me a better overall experience when shooting with this camera, really ranks it a lot higher for me than the previous generation. The next pro is going to be the in-body image stabilization, or IBIS. I felt like this was something that was really helpful for me because I like being able to be on the go and taking images as I'm moving around. Having the ability to be on a bike, snap a picture of somebody that's riding next to me, and have it come out in focus is really awesome. It feels really good to just have this camera on me to snap pictures no matter what situation I'm in. And that's a really, really big pro for me because it makes me want to shoot with this camera. And that's always going to be something that ranks a camera really high for me. The last pro that I do want to cover is the fact that this camera is still super, super sleek, even though they were able to put the new processor in it and they were able to keep almost all of the aesthetics the same. It's still only 521 grams, which is barely a pound. Hey Siri, how many pounds is 521 grams?
121 grams is 0.27 pounds.
It's not even half a pound. That's amazing. So you really don't notice the weight when you're walking around with this camera. It's not something that feels cumbersome. It's almost like it's not even there. Having a point and shoot that's just like super easy and lightweight is a big plus. Let's talk about the cons. First, the price. I don't love that this camera is $1,600 because I feel like as a camera that is supposed to be something for people who are trying to do this leisurely, use it for travel photography, it feels like a barrier to entry. And I hate that because it's going to keep people from being able to enjoy and use a camera that is really wonderful because the price is steep. That's a lot of money for somebody who's getting into photography. It does come with a body and lens. The lens is fixed, which I don't love. That is another con for me. But as far as price goes, $1,600 is a lot of money for anyone. And while I do believe that Fuji has done amazing things with the updates that they've brought to this newest generation, there is access to real film cameras. So the fact that there are cameras out there that you can get around $400, $500, which is a third of the price of this camera, with real film makes it feel like it's going to be easier for people to just shoot film than it is to purchase a $1,600 digital camera. I want people to be able to take pictures wherever they are and to have access to wonderful cameras. $1,600 is still a lot of money, which makes it a con for me. And the only other con I can think of for this camera is the fact that putting in the film simulations or film recipes is a bit tedious. Once they're in there, they're set and you're good to go. But you have to go through several settings and it can be a bit tedious, especially if you're saving 20 recipes. It's gonna take you a decent amount of time for you to get all of those loaded into the camera and saved. And I do like the film simulations. As someone who shoots film regularly, I loaded a Portra 400 recipe into this camera and I was happy with the results I got. Here are some of the photos from the last month of shooting with this camera. I hope you enjoy them. While there are a few cons to owning this newest generation of the camera, I do think that it is better than the old generation, and it's worth upgrading. Honestly, I think I'm going to sell this one, or my husband's going to sell it because it's technically his camera, and we might end up with this one. It was really fun to shoot. There are other cameras out there, but I don't think that they knocked it out of the park the way that Fuji has with this newest generation. I gave Fuji a second chance, and I'm really glad that I did because this thing has truly truly impressed me, and I think I may be adding it to the shelf. If you like this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll make sure I link all of the gear we use down below so you have access to it. And until next time, I'm Tilly Scholl, and I'll catch you on the next one.